Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation entitled Reconstructing the 14th Century Soundscape of the Great Chapel at the Palais des Papes, Archaeoacoustic Methods and Visitor Engagement. My name is Julien De Muynke. I recently completed my PhD in Archaeoacoustics at Sorbonne University, which focused on the acoustic reconstruction of heritage spaces, including the medieval Palais des Papes. I am a researcher in spatial audio and room acoustics at Eurecat, Technology Center of Catalonia, since 2015, and I am also the co-founder of the cultural mediation agency Talkartive. In this presentation, I will show that in order to better understand medieval music, we also need to reconstruct the spaces where it was once performed and heard. This presentation is constructed as follows. So after a brief description of the context and motivation for this research, I will present some methods that are commonly used in archaeoacoustics, as well as some results issued from an experiment with music performers. Then we will move on to a practical use case for the general public, namely an immersive visit experience using reconstructed acoustics for the visitors at the Palais des Papes, which is currently under development. But before going any further, if you have headphones, I recommend to use them, as I will show some audio example mixed in binaural. So, why historical acoustics is so important? Well, because it shaped the musical perception for both performers and passive listeners. So, historically reconstructed soundscapes must include not only audio sources specific to a time era, but also the acoustics of the enclosing space. These lines of research were further developed in my PhD dissertation, referenced at the bottom of this slide, and which will be published very soon. So, as some of you may know already, archaeoacoustics is essentially an interdisciplinary field of research, bringing together archaeologists, historians, musicologists, heritage architects, and acousticians, among others. And by studying the properties of archaeological sites and artifacts, archaeoacoustics illuminates the production and perception of sound by past societies in specific locations. And as illustrated on these pictures, it covers a large diversity of geographical areas and time eras. So in this presentation, we'll address the specific use case of the Great Chapel of the Palais des Papes in the 14th century, when the papacy moved from Rome to Avignon. The Great Chapel, which is the largest and most sumptuous chapel of the Palais des Papes, was commissioned by Pope Clement VI during the last expansion phase of the Palais des Papes, and it became a renowned center for the practice of Ars Nova, which is a genre of polyphonic chant that emerged in the first half of the 14th century in southern France and northern Italy. As you can hopefully observe on this picture, the modern-day chapel looks different from its medieval counterpart, but while the interior architecture is quite similar across the historical states, the interior decoration and furnishing have changed significantly. So this is a picture of the modern chapel, which is essentially an empty space made of mostly hard polished limestone, which makes it quite a reverberant space, while the medieval chapel had many ornament and furnishing elements, so wall tapestries, seating elements in wood for the congregation in the nave. Here in the Pacus Cantor room, which is the space for the cantors and the cardinals, we had stalls on both sides, rush matting on the floor, and we had many different clothing elements across the chapel. For example, these canopies above the altar and the Pope's throne. So in this project, our goal was to reconstruct the acoustics of the medieval Great Chapel through the development of an acoustic model, and this was done in two main steps. So first I designed a calibrated acoustic model of the modern chapel, and then I derived its medieval counterpart by undoing the historical changes using historical sources. So this development was a step-by-step process which started with on-site acoustic measurements. So we measured what we called room impulse responses there, which provided some insights into the main acoustic characteristics of the modern chapel. I then designed the geometry based on some laser scans that were used as a reference. I then did a first assignment at least of the material properties using properties from public databases, and those properties were further iteratively refined through a process that we call the acoustic calibration, which consists in adjusting iteratively those properties until the simulations match the measurements done in the first step. So at this stage we have a calibrated model of the modern chapel, and the medieval counterpart is obtained by including in the model the medieval materials. So now let's have a look at the acoustic model. So the above picture is the modern chapel, and the bottom picture is the medieval chapel. The different colors indicate the different materials used in the models, and the light gray blocks indicate the audience in the nave. Those models are used in ray tracing software, which functions as indicated on this small animation, which allows to position sources and receivers at any chosen location in order to simulate any specific listening conditions. Now let's look very briefly at the main acoustic characteristics of the chapel. So this graph shows the reverberation time across frequency bands. It compares mainly the modern and the medieval chapel, and it also shows the impact of including an audience in the chapel. So what we can observe here is that in general, the reverberation time of the medieval chapel was much lower than that of the modern chapel, and it also shows that including an audience further reduces the reverberation time. So the medieval chapel had much drier acoustics, probably due to the different hangings and decoration element decorating the chapel. Another important acoustic characteristic is the intelligibility of the singing. So those are maps of intelligibility, where brighter colors indicate higher intelligibility and darker colors indicate lower intelligibility. So we can observe that in general the medieval chapel benefited from a higher intelligibility compared to the modern chapel. And in complement to this objective analysis, let's now listen to a few audio examples. So in the following simulations, we used 4 singers in the middle, in the center of the Parcus Cantorum, and we'll be listening from the Pope's position, denoted R4 here on these maps. And we'll start with the medieval chapel. I recommend to use headphones for that. So let's go. And now we'll continue with the modern chapel. So, as you clearly heard, the longer reverberation time of the modern chapel tends to mix together the different sounds, which leads to a decreased intelligibility. Now a few words about an oralization system for performers from an ensemble that we developed in my lab at Sorbonne University with different colleagues of mine. So this system uses individual proximity microphones and headphones, and it allows to simulate the acoustics of the performance space through headphone reproduction, which provides realistic performance conditions while still allowing dry individual recordings. These dry recordings can then be used later in post-hoc oralizations to simulate, for example, any given listening position in the chapel and or different acoustic spaces, or even to study the impact of the acoustics on music performance through an objective musical analysis. In this video, will experience the difference between the dry singing, this is what is heard in the anechoic room, and the oralized singing, which is what they hear in their headphones while singing. This video is recorded from the position of the conductor, who is facing the singers, so we'll see and hear through the eyes and the ears of the conductor. The first half of the video is dry and the second half is oralized using the reverberation simulated by the acoustic model. Once again, I recommend the use of headphones. Let's go. Now let's move to the last part of this presentation with the public application of the research presented before through the SO1 project. So drawing from research on archaeoacoustics and medieval musicology, this project develops an immersive experience for the visitors at the Palais des Papes using a mobile application, headphones reproduction, and an indoor geolocation system. It recreates the conditions of Ars Nova production and reception in the medieval Palais des Papes, using a storytelling built upon an embodied narrative, historic soundscapes, and reconstructed acoustics. An important aspect of this project is that the visit is designed in co-creation between a scientific committee and the cultural mediation agency Talkartive that already developed the immersive visit Echo of Notre-Dame de Paris, which is freely available on the app stores. So this collaboration between scientists and a cultural mediation agency aims to create a lively storyline about a time era which probably remains unknown to most of non-experts and based on historically validated facts. So this visit is mostly an auditory experience that accompanies the visitor along the route, less intrusive than visual displays that can sometimes substitute the real environment. It has 7 listening stations along the route, and the visitors are geolocated through Bluetooth low energy beacons. And in addition to the embodied narrative delivered by a fictional character, a cantor from the Papal Court, which is shown on the bottom picture, the narrative will also feature contributions from scientists on their work reconstructing the historical sonic identity of the Palais des Papes. The visit is intended for small groups of visitors and will offer post-visit resources through the exclusive access to a website. The app will embed user analytics, allowing to measure visitor engagement, and the first version of the visit in French is planned to be deployed at the Palais des Papes in early 2026. So stay tuned for more news. This concludes my presentation, so I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions.